tuned in to Beyond the Known. In 1922, deep within Egypt's Valley of the Kings, Howard Carter peered through a small breach in a sealed doorway and declared he saw wonderful things.
Incredible moment.
Absolutely. But what he didn't mention then, and what continues to puzzle archaeologists and theorists alike, are the peculiar inconsistencies and eerie phenomena surrounding Tutankhamun's burial.
So many questions.
Why was his tomb so small?
Right.
Why was it hastily prepared? And what about those strange wall markings, lingering smells, and even rumors of hidden chambers?
Exactly.
In this episode, we unseal the secrets of Tutankhamun's final resting place. Each oddity is examined with a critical eye, from mainstream academic interpretations to the more fringe speculative ideas that refuse to stay buried. Okay, let's jump right into this incredible story and unpack what our research tells us about the young king who became, well, famous only really after death.
Right. Tutankhamun was an 18th dynasty pharaoh, often called the Boy King, because he likely came to the throne at the tender age of maybe 9?
9 years old, wow.
Yeah. His reign, from around 1333 to 1324 BC, was relatively short. And honestly, for centuries after his death, he was a somewhat obscure figure until Carter's stunning find.
And who did he follow? Someone pretty disruptive, right? Akhenaten.
Absolutely. His likely father was Akhenaten, perhaps the most controversial pharaoh in Egyptian history. Akhenaten completely upended the traditional religious order.
How so?
Well, he turned his back on the powerful priests of gods like Amun and championed the worship of a single deity, the Aten, essentially, the sun disk. It was a radical shift, forbidding the worship of others.
That sounds like it would cause some chaos.
Oh, it did. The period known as the Amarna era, named after his capital city, was marked by intense upheaval. After Akhenaten died, there was a strong backlash, a real push to restore the old ways, particularly the cult of Amun.
And it wasn't a simple handoff of power, was it? There's a theory floating around that someone might have reigned briefly between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun.
Yes, there's some compelling evidence suggesting a female ruler, perhaps Nefertiti, Akhenaten's great royal wife, may have ruled for a short time.
Nefertiti herself.
Possibly. Potentially using the name Nefer-Neferuaten. Things like a co-regency stela, basically a stone carving showing two rulers together, sort of support this idea, though the details around her name changes make it quite complex. It's still debated.
So Tutankhamun inherits a kingdom reeling from religious revolution and political instability. This chaotic backdrop is absolutely key, isn't it, to understanding why his tomb is so, well, strange.
Exactly. It sets the stage perfectly.
Let's start there. The tomb itself, KV62, is famously small.
Right. Compared to other 18th dynasty royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, KV62 is, well, modest in size, and its architectural plan is quite different. It doesn't quite fit the pattern.
So what do mainstream Egyptologists think when they look at this?
They generally conclude it wasn't originally built for a pharaoh at all. The thinking is it was likely intended for a queen, maybe even Nefertiti, or perhaps a high-status noble. The leading explanation for why Tutankhamun ended up there is his sudden and young death, around age 18 or 19. A grand royal tomb simply wouldn't have been ready in time.
So the small tomb is seen as a sign of a hasty, almost emergency burial situation.
Precisely. It fits the narrative of unexpected death. But this is where more speculative theories diverge.
Ah, okay. Like what?
Well, some suggest the small size and unusual layout hint at something more deliberate, that perhaps it was meant for someone else, like Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun was placed there, maybe even sharing the space somehow.
Sharing the space.
Yeah, which fuels the whole discussion about possible hidden chambers, something we'll get into.
That really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Was it just the scramble of dealing with an unexpected death, or was there something more to it?
And speaking of haste, let's look at the decoration inside the tomb. It also seems different, a bit rushed.
It does. The wall paintings, while beautiful, sometimes appear rushed. Our research points to irregular craftsmanship, and parts aren't fully decorated like you might expect in a pharaoh's tomb.
More significantly, the scenes themselves mark a clear shift away from the Amarna style that Akhenaten favored. We see depictions of the traditional funerary procession, and very notably, his successor, King I, performing the opening of the mouth ritual on Tutankhamun.
Okay, remind us what exactly is the opening of the mouth ritual.
It was a crucial ancient Egyptian ceremony performed on mummies or sometimes statues. The idea was to magically restore the senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and the ability to speak and move so the deceased could function and, well, interact properly in the afterlife.
So it's about enabling the afterlife journey.
Exactly. And seeing Eye perform this for Tutankhamun, who's depicted as the god Osiris in this scene, is very significant.
And why is that so important? What does it tell us?
It's a clear signal of a return to traditional pre-Amarna funerary practices, specifically the revival of the Osiris cult, which Akhenaten had suppressed. It also, importantly, legitimizes Eye's succession. The man performing this crucial ritual for the deceased pharaoh was typically his chosen successor.
Right, okay. So mainstream views link this rushed appearance and the traditional imagery back to the hasty burial they had to quickly get the king buried, following the old rites that had been sidelined for a while.
Yes, that's the standard interpretation. The art reflects the religious U-turn and the time pressure. But as you might expect, fringe perspectives argue the haste might hint at something beyond just practicality.
Such as?
Some suggest it could point to an emergency political cover-up or maybe even an intentional sort of magical sabotage of Tutankhamun's journey to the afterlife.
Sabotage? Why would they do that?
Perhaps to weaken his spiritual power or diminish his status posthumously, maybe due to lingering connections to the Amarna period. It's speculative, of course.
Fascinating. Okay, from the tomb's contents to the stories surrounding its discovery, let's talk about the phenomenon everyone knows. The curse.
Ah, yes. The famous curse of the pharaohs. It absolutely exploded into public consciousness right after the discovery in 1922.
And it was fueled by real events, wasn't it? I mean, the deaths of several people connected to the tomb's opening were widely reported. Lord Carnarvon, Arthur Mace, Richard Bethel, people like that.
Absolutely. The narrative really took hold when Lord Carnarvon, Howard Carter's financial backer, died just months after the tomb was unsealed.
And how did he die again?
Our research indicates he passed away from blood poisoning and pneumonia, which developed after a mosquito bite became infected.
A simple insect bite turned into this global sensation about a deadly curse.
Exactly. The press ran wild with it. They linked basically every subsequent illness or death remotely connected to the expedition, no matter how unrelated, to some ancient curse protecting the tomb. It was incredible sensationalism, perfect for selling newspapers at the time.
But mainstream science offered different, more grounded explanations, didn't it?
They did. They looked at things like potential exposure to dangerous molds or fungi inside the sealed tomb, or possibly ancient poisons, maybe even something like anthrax spores that could theoretically survive for millennia.
Plausible? Maybe.
Plausible, but largely, it's attributed to coincidence amplified by that hungry press. There was even a study published in the British Medical Journal, quite famously, that found no statistically significant difference in mortality rates between those who actually entered the tomb and a control group who didn't.
So the science points strongly towards sensationalism and coincidence.
Pretty much. But the idea of a supernatural curse, divine protection, ancient magic spells, even modern conspiracy theories involving secret societies that captured the public imagination, it became an enduring part of popular culture, films, books.
It's a classic case of how a compelling story can just overshadow the facts, isn't it?
It really shows the power of narrative and folklore, especially when dealing with something as mysterious as ancient Egypt.
Let's shift gears now to the man himself, or rather, what was left of him. Tutankhamun's mummy wasn't found in pristine condition, was it? Our research mentioned something pretty stark.
No, far from it. Carter himself described it as a shriveled, broken thing and noted it was in an appalling condition.
And the process of removing it from the coffin sounds brutal.
It really was, by modern standards especially. Howard Carter and the anatomist Douglas Derry had a heck of a job. They had to extract the mummy from multiple nested coffins and the solid gold mask, all of which were basically glued together by solidified embalming resins poured over them.
So how did they manage it?
Well, they used heat, leaving it out in the sun. They poured hot paraffin wax on it and ultimately had to resort to physically prying the body out. Our research indicates they even had to disarticulate limbs and slice the mask away from the skull where it was stuck fast.
Wow. That sounds like it would cause significant damage just in itself.
It absolutely did. The mummy suffered greatly during that removal process. But that's not the whole story. Modern analysis, particularly CT scans, also revealed evidence of significant burning that happened before or during the mummification process itself.
Burning?
The leading theory now is a spontaneous chemical reaction. It seems the particular embalming oils and resins used reacted with oxygen and the linen wrappings once the body was sealed in the coffin, essentially causing it to slowly combust or char.
So the mummy was in bad shape, both from the ancient processes and the modern recovery.
That's right. But again, alternative theories exist for the burning.
Of course. What are they?
Some speculate the burning wasn't just accidental chemistry, but potentially intentional. Was it an attempt at desecration, maybe by enemies? Or perhaps a way to hide signs of foul play, like injuries? Other ideas lean towards a simply botched mummification process, maybe performed under extreme pressure due to the sudden death, or even some suggest a ritual gone wrong during the burial ceremonies.
It just adds another layer to the mystery of his fate, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Now let's go back to the tomb itself for a moment. The possibility of hidden chambers behind the walls has been a huge point of debate in recent years.
Oh, yes. It really kicked off with radar scans, GPR, ground-penetrating radar, suggesting potential voids or anomalies behind the north and west walls of the burial chamber.
And Nicholas Reeves was a key proponent of this, right? Suggesting Nefertiti might be in there.
Exactly. Reeves put forward the hypothesis that Tutankhamun's tomb was actually just the antechamber to a larger tomb complex, specifically Nefertiti's undiscovered burial chamber.
But mainstream Egyptologists, figures like Zahi Hawass, have strongly pushed back against these claims.
Yes, Hawass in particular has been very vocal, stating that the evidence presented for hidden chambers was, in his view, scientifically flawed. He's argued there's simply nothing there.
What were his main objections?
He raised points like the absence of Nefertiti's name anywhere in Tutankhamun's tomb and argued about the symbolic impossibility in ancient Egyptian belief of sealing off a queen's burial chamber from the afterlife by blocking it with another burial.
Yet the debate hasn't completely gone away, has it?
It really hasn't. Fringe interpretations persist, fueled by the tantalizing idea of secret rooms, maybe containing other royal burials like Nefertiti's, or maybe even hints of suppressed discoveries linked to political sensitivities or lost ancient knowledge.
And the conflicting radar results haven't helped settle it.
Not at all. The fact that different radar teams have produced different, sometimes conflicting results just keeps the speculation alive.
I understand Russian radar might be planned to give it another look. Is that still on the cards?
That was the plan, yes. Further investigation using potentially different technology is hoped by proponents to settle the debate one way or the other. It's a mystery that truly refuses to stay buried, quite literally.
Okay, beyond the tomb structure and the mummy, even Tutankhamun's most iconic artifact, his incredible gold death mask, holds some strange clues according to our research.
It's one of the most famous objects in the entire world, absolutely stunning. But if you look closely, particularly at details like the earlobes, they're pierced, which was common for women and children, but not usually adult male pharaohs, and compare its facial features to other known images of Tutankhamun.
Yes.
Some Egyptologists argue it wasn't originally made for him.
Not made for Tutankhamun. For the most famous pharaoh, how could that happen?
Well, the mainstream theory loops back to his sudden death. Given the scramble for the burial, the idea is that an existing mask, perhaps one already in production or completed for someone else, was quickly repurposed.
Repurposed to for?
The most prominent suggestion is that it was originally made for Nefertiti, or possibly Neferutin. The distinct facial features, the pierced ears, what some perceive as slightly more feminine qualities, seem to support this idea for some researchers.
Interesting. So, again, the sudden death explanation leads to a last-minute swap.
Exactly. A practical solution in a crisis. But naturally, fringe views take it further. Some suggest the mask's perceived ambiguity or maybe dual features could be intentional, perhaps symbolizing gender duality or deliberately creating identity confusion for some ritual purpose. Others link it back to a political cover-up, maybe masking the identity of a politically sensitive predecessor or linking him symbolically to someone like Nefertiti for legitimacy.
It makes you really wonder about the layers of identity being presented, intentionally or not. And speaking of unusual artifacts, his tomb contains some truly unique items, didn't it? Things not typically found.
It absolutely did. Among the thousands of treasures were some really standout items, like daggers made from meteoritic iron. That's iron that literally fell from the sky in meteorites.
Wow, iron from space.
Exactly. And other artifacts used incredibly rare materials, things not commonly found or sourced in Egypt at the time.
So what do we make of these cosmic connections and rare finds? What's the standard view?
The mainstream interpretation points to the Egyptians having access to pretty extensive trade networks across the Near East and Africa, and also their deep reverence for celestial objects. Things like meteoritic iron were likely seen as intensely powerful, literal gifts from the gods, linked to the heavens and immortality. Iron from the sky, they called it.
Makes sense in a highly religious society like that.
Yeah.
But the fringe takes a different view, I assume.
Yes. The use of meteoritic iron, which is difficult to work, and questions about the origin and manufacturing techniques of other highly rare or complex artifacts, well, they spark more speculative ideas.
Like?
You get suggestions ranging from extraterrestrial origin, actual gifts from alien visitors in some narratives, or maybe artifacts inherited from advanced, lost pre-dynastic civilizations that possess some kind of lost high technology, seeing them as clues to a history far older and more complex than traditionally understood.
Wow, okay, that's definitely venturing into the fringe.
Yeah.
Finally, let's tackle the big question that still sparks so much debate. How did Tutankhamun actually die? He was so young.
It's been a long-standing mystery, hasn't it? Theories over the decades have ranged all over the place. Inherited bone diseases like Kohler disease, suggestions he fell from a chariot during a hunt, even outright murder.
And what did the modern science tell us? The CT scans and DNA tests.
A major study published in JAMA used CT scans and DNA tests on Tutankhamun and several other related royal mummies. Their conclusion was that he likely died from complications related to a severely broken leg, probably just above the knee.
A broken leg that killed him.
Well, the break itself was bad, likely an open fracture, but it seems it was exacerbated by malaria. His DNA showed clear evidence he suffered from Plasmodium falciparum malaria, the most severe form. So infection from the break combined with the malaria flare-up is the current leading theory.
Did they find anything else? What about that head injury theory?
They did note evidence of a potential head injury, but the analysis suggested it likely occurred after death, possibly during the embalming process or even Carter's examination. They weren't conclusive that it contributed to his death.
So a natural cause,
Yeah.
though perhaps complicated and ultimately quite unlucky.
That's certainly the mainstream medical interpretation based on the current evidence, but, it hasn't entirely silenced other ideas, especially given the political climate.
Right. What kind of other ideas persist?
Some fringe theories still lean towards foul play. Perhaps assassination by powerful court officials like or Horemheb who were maneuvering for power after him, or maybe a revenge plot tied to the lasting anger over his father Akhenaten's religious reforms.
And even more extreme ideas.
Some even speculate about a ritualistic sacrifice, perhaps intended to somehow restore cosmic balance or Mot to the throne during such turbulent times, though there's no direct evidence for that.
The DNA testing also revealed some fascinating and pretty complicated family dynamics, didn't it, based on our research?
It certainly did. It strongly identified his parents as the mummy believed to be Akhenaten from tomb KV55, and an unidentified female mummy from tomb KV35, known to Egyptologists only as KV35YL, or the younger lady.
And the controversial part.
Critically, the DNA analysis also suggested his parents were siblings, a full brother and sister. This revealed a pattern of incest within the highest levels of the royal family, which wasn't unknown but confirms it for Tutankhamun's parentage.
That definitely sheds light on potential congenital health issues he might have had.
Exactly. Conditions like the possible bone disease, the clubfoot often mentioned. And the complexity of these relationships, plus the fact we still haven't definitively identified the mummy of his successor, has led to calls for further retesting and analysis of more royal mummies. The goal is to better understand the 18th dynasty's tangled family tree and perhaps get clues as to why it eventually ended not long after Tutankhamun.
So despite CT scans, DNA tests, and really a century of intense study, the full story of Tutankhamun's health, his family, and his final moments remains partly obscured.
It really shows how, even with incredible discoveries in modern science, the past can still hold on to its secrets quite tightly.
So what does this all add up to? We've looked at the The bizarrely small tomb, the hurried decoration, the captivating curse, the damaged mummy, the potential hidden rooms that possibly repurposed mask, the strange artifacts, and the still debated cause of death. Each oddity seems somehow intertwined with the incredibly unstable period Tutankhamun lived and died in, that messy, complex transition following the Amarna Revolution.
Absolutely. All these peculiarities could simply be the unavoidable consequences, the scars, if you will, of a kingdom scrambling to cope with a sudden death and restore traditional order after years of radical change under Akhenaten.
Which leaves us with the big question for you listening. Were these just the inevitable marks left by a kingdom in chaos, or are they hints of something deeper? Perhaps a deliberately buried truth still waiting beneath the Egyptian sand. That's it for this journey beyond the known. If the unknown calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. There's so much more waiting to be discovered.